just wait a little bit. That was, look, better that it happened now rather than mid first sentence. But we will just wait a second as we wait for him. Actually, there are still people joining us as well, so that will enable us to make sure that everyone is together. Ah, Hugh, you are there. Great.
Yeah, right on cue when you said the internet in Finchley is being a bit dodgy. My internet dropped out.
Great. It's over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. Yeah, sleep for me is an incredibly fascinating subject. We spend a third of our lives doing it, and yet we don't have a really good understanding of why we do it. But the one thing we do know is that it's really important for health, for well-being, and particularly for mental health. And I know that for a lot of people during the lockdown, sleep has perhaps not been as good as it could be. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and hopefully this will work. Okay. So I'm going to just take you through some very simple techniques, principles to look after your sleep during the lockdown. Now, a lot of these rules, if you like, that I'm going to give you are really for people who are battling with your sleep. If you are currently a good sleeper, most of what I say is not going to apply to you, but you'll still pick up a few pieces here that will help to protect your sleep. And the things that affect our sleep are, there's a whole range of things that will impact on our sleep. And there are really 6 areas that affect our sleep. There's what's called our homeostatic sleep drive and our circadian rhythm. And if you don't know what those are, don't worry, because I'm going to go into those in a moment. There are obviously going to be physical factors. If you are in pain, or if your bladder wakes you at night. And these can obviously have an impact on your sleep. Very pertinent at the moment will be the psychological factors. So anxiety, mood, whether you might suffer from a longer-term mental health condition that impacts on your sleep. There's the environment. Do you sleep in a place that's sufficiently quiet, where you feel safe, where the temperature is right? And then I've put there medication, but actually that's medication and other substances. So that would include things such as alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of these factors today. We don't have the time to go through everything. But I do want to just mention one of these substances, which is caffeine. We all know that caffeine is a stimulant, that it keeps us awake. It can be very effective at keeping us awake, but it's also quite a long-acting stimulant. It's got a half-life of around 6 hours. And what that means is that if you've had a double espresso at 4, you've still got a single espresso in your bloodstream at 10. And so you need to have a relatively early cutoff for stopping your caffeine to ensure that it doesn't interfere with your sleep. And what we suggest is that if you are having difficulty with your sleep, to not have any caffeine after around 2 p.m. The reason that we say you shouldn't have, you don't caffeine later in the day, but we do allow it at 2 p.m. because one of the things I'm going to talk about is the importance of not napping. And one of the most difficult times if you are feeling sleepy is the early afternoon. So we want you to be able to have that cup of coffee to get you through that early afternoon slump. So moving on to the techniques. So I first want to introduce you to this concept of what we call the homeostatic sleep drive. And this is really just a convoluted way of describing sleepiness. Sleepiness is the fuel that drives our sleep. Now, from the moment that you wake up in the morning, you start to accumulate sleepiness. You start to build up sleepiness. So in a sense, what you're doing is you are filling up your fuel tank with sleep fuel. And that tank fills up until it reaches full, and you've got enough sleep fuel on board, enough sleepiness on board to fall asleep. And as you sleep, you use up that fuel. And when your tank reaches empty in the morning, you've now got no more sleepiness on board, you wake up, and the cycle repeats itself. So the first really important principle is to start filling up your tank at the same time every day. So what we ask people to do if they are having difficulty with sleep is to set an alarm to wake up and get up at the same time every day, 7 days a week, whether you've slept well or badly, regardless of the time you've gone to bed. Now, having made myself very unpopular, let me explain why this is so important. Let's say you have someone who is a 5-hour sleeper. So they sleep 5 hours at night, which means they're awake for 19 hours during the day. Or to put it another way, it takes them 19 hours to fill up the tank and 5 hours to empty it. If they wake up at 7 in the morning and they start filling up their tank at 7 in the morning and it takes them 19 hours to fill up the tank, their tank will only reach full at around 2 in the morning. The reality is they're probably not going to bed at 2 in the morning. They're going to bed at what we would call a civilized hour, so say 11 o'clock at night, which means they are probably not going to bed when their tank is full. And so one of two things is going to happen. Either they will lie in bed for 3 hours waiting for that tank to fill up before they fall asleep, or if they do fall asleep at 11 o'clock, because they fall asleep without a full fuel tank, halfway through the night they run out of fuel and wake up. But suppose that this person says, well, look, I'm in lockdown at the moment. There's nothing I need to get up for tomorrow. I don't have any Zoom meetings. So instead of waking up at 7, I'm going to wake up at 9. If they only wake up at 9, they only start filling up their tank at 9, then their tank will only reach full at 4 in the morning. And so if they go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, instead of lying awake for 3 hours waiting for their tank to fill up, now they have to lie awake for 5 hours before they fall asleep. Or again, if they do fall asleep at 11, they've got even less fuel on board, so they're going to run out of fuel earlier in the evening and wake up even earlier than they would otherwise do. So one of the bits of advice that is often given to people who have insomnia is to go to bed at the same time every night. And it turns out that that's actually pretty bad advice, because this person could go to bed religiously at 11 o'clock every night, but whether they fall asleep at 3 or at 5 is not, 2 or 4 is not determined by what time they've gone to bed. It's being determined by what time they've gotten up. If you get up at the same time every day, you start to fill up your tank at the same time every day, and your tank reaches full at the same time every night. And so you will naturally feel sleepy at the same time every night. And as a result, your bedtime will become more consistent as well. And you've probably all experienced this. If you think about what night of the week do most people sleep the worst? And 9 out of 10 people who are working or studying will tell you it's a Sunday night. And the reason is that most people have that lie-in on a Sunday morning, which means that when they go to bed on Sunday night, their tank is not full. So the first important technique is to set an alarm to wake up and get up at the same time every day. I should say it's absolutely fine to get up before your alarm. So if you've set your alarm for 7 or 9 or whatever time you set, it doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent about it. But if you say you've set it at 7 o'clock and one day you need to get up at 6 o'clock, that's absolutely fine. You can get up before your alarm, but just not after the alarm. You also don't have to jump straight out of bed as soon as the alarm goes off. It's fine to hit the snooze button a couple of times, but no more than a couple of times. You want to you want to get up within about 15-20 minutes of that first alarm going off. Next thing to do is to ensure that you only go to bed when your tank is full. And you want to be going to bed here rather than over here. And the question is, how do you know when your tank is full? Well, the way that we would do this in clinic is we ask patients to keep a sleep diary for a week. And across that week, we get them to work out their average sleep time. So let's say across the week, they say, well, I reckon I sleep about 6.5 hours. We then subtract that average sleep time from their rising time. So if they're getting up at 7 and they say, well, I sleep on average 6.5 hours, we say 7 a.m. minus 6.5 hours is 12:30 at night. and that is now your earliest bedtime. There is one proviso here, which is that if someone feels that they're sleeping less than 5 hours, then we simply say rising time minus 5 hours. So if someone is getting up at, say, 8 o'clock, and they think they only sleep 3 hours, we would say 8 o'clock minus 5 hours. So your earliest bedtime is now 3 a.m. So you subtract your average sleep time from your rising time, and this becomes your earliest bedtime. And the rule now becomes this, which is if you get to your earliest bedtime and you are sleepy, you are allowed to go to bed. If you feel sleepy before you get to that earliest bedtime, you need to wait until you've reached that earliest bedtime before you get into the bed. Similarly, if you get to your earliest bedtime and you're feeling wide awake, you don't go to bed. You wait until you are sleepy. So you've always got to meet those two conditions. I only go to bed when I've reached my earliest bedtime and I'm feeling sleepy. What people will find is often the first 3 or 4 nights you do this, you sleep worse, because this is a very anxiety-provoking thing to do. And it's the exact opposite of what common sense tells you to do. Common sense says if I'm not getting enough sleep, I should go to bed earlier to give myself more opportunity to sleep. And here, someone's just told me I've got to go to bed later. That's crazy. And of course, that does take a bit of getting your head around. And so the first 3 or 4 nights, often people will sleep a bit worse. But very quickly, what people find is that when you compress your time in bed, when you spend less time in bed, the quality of your sleep improves dramatically. If you are spending 8 hours in bed, but only sleeping 5 hours, it's like you're trying to make 8 cups of tea with 5 tea bags. They're all going to be rubbish cups of tea. It's much better to spend 5 hours in bed. If you're sleeping 5 hours, that's making 5 cups of tea with the 5 tea bags that are all going to be good quality cups of tea. Once you find that I go to bed, I fall asleep within 15, 20 minutes, I'm not awake for more than about 15, 20 minutes during the night, then you can experiment with moving that earliest bedtime 15 minutes earlier. Give it a week at that new earliest bedtime, and if things are still going well, you can move it earlier again. So we compress your time in bed down to solidify the sleep, to improve the sleep quality, and then you can very, very gradually increase your time in bed to increase the quantity as well. Incidentally, one of the most important things to ensure is that you don't allow any of your sleep fuel to leak out during the day. And the way that it would leak out is if you were to take a nap, intentionally or unintentionally, because if you fall asleep during the day, you're going to use up some of your sleep fuel, and that's going to make it harder to fill up that tank. So any sleep you have in the day is going to be stealing that sleep from the next night. So that's how you harness your homeostatic sleep drive, one of these prime physiological drivers of sleep. The other physiological driver of sleep is what we call the circadian rhythm, your internal body clock. Now, almost every cell in your body has a little clock that tells it when it should be active and when it should be quiet. Now, these billions of clocks need to be synchronized with each other. And so there is a master clock that sits in your brain. And this master clock tells your body when it is daytime and you should be awake, and when it's nighttime and you should be asleep. But this internal body clock also needs to be synchronized repeatedly with the outside world. Otherwise, like any watch that's not absolutely accurate, it will tend to drift. And the prime synchronizer of your body clock is morning light, the first dose of bright light you get in your eyes in the morning, particularly blue or green light. And so in order to keep a constant circadian rhythm, what's really important is to get exposed to light and if possible daylight, to get outdoors as early in the morning as possible. So if the weather allows, when you wake up in the morning, you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, put your clothes on, and go and sit and have your breakfast in the garden for half an hour, or go for your walk for half an hour in the morning. If it's not possible to get outdoors, then find the room in your house that's got the most sunlight coming in and sit by the window. And having this light in the morning is something that's become even more important during the lockdown, because for many of us, when we're not in lockdown, we get our first dose of light in the morning every morning because we're walking to the tube or to the bus stop. At the moment, we're not doing that. And so we have to make a concerted effort to ensure that we're getting exposed to light in the morning. And if you are getting up at the same time every day, as you should be, then you will be getting your first dose of light at the same time every day. And that, again, helps to anchor your body clock. What's been shown is that people who sleep in on the weekend, because they get that first dose of light later on the Saturday and the Sunday, they can effectively jet lag themselves by 2 time zones by Monday morning. So getting up at the same time every day and getting outdoors in the morning will help to anchor your body clock and keep your sleep cycle predictable. What about exercise? Well, it's not entirely clear how much exercise contributes to good sleep. But what we do know is that if you are sedentary, if you're someone who doesn't exercise regularly, then increasing exercise can have a significant beneficial effect on your sleep. So if you are someone who is already physically active, increasing exercise may or may not improve sleep, we don't know. But if you're someone who's not currently active, then doing exercise can dramatically improve sleep. It is something which can take quite a long time to kick in. So it's not a case of if I exercise today, I will sleep better tonight. It's a case of if I exercise on a regular basis over a period of many weeks or months, my sleep will improve every night, not just the nights when I've exercised. And the problem is, again, in the lockdown, most of us have become much more sedentary than we would otherwise be. We're not walking up to the shops. We're not getting out and about in the way that we normally would. And so we need to make additional effort to ensure that we are getting a decent amount of physical activity during the day. People often ask, well, what's the best activity to do for your sleep? And the answer is very simply the one that you enjoy enough that you will do it on a regular basis over the long term. It doesn't matter whether it's lifting weights or going for a walk or just walking the dog or running, whatever you enjoy doing that you will be able to stick to regularly. Those are the 2 physiological drivers of good sleep. I want to talk now about a technique that we call stimulus control, and it's a really clunky name for a technique, but this is something that's been around for the last 50 odd years, and so we've been able to test this technique again and again in different populations, different types of insomnia, and it's been shown again and again to be an incredibly powerful technique. But it's a technique that works very slowly. Now, most of you have probably heard of Pavlov and his dogs. Now, Pavlov was a Russian physiologist who was interested in digestion, and he was doing some, to be honest, quite unpleasant experiments on man's best friend, one of which involved looking at saliva production. So he surgically inserted a tube into the dog's mouths, and he would get his assistant to come into the lab, put food down in front of the dog, and then measure how much saliva the dog produced. And of course, what happened was when the assistant put food in front of the dog would drool. Now, that's not a surprise to anyone who's got a dog. But Pavlov then noticed something interesting, which was that after a few days, the dogs would start drooling every time they saw the assistant, whether that assistant had food or not. And in fact, even if they heard the assistant in the other room pottering around, they would start drooling. And his great insight was that the dogs had come to associate the assistant with the food. And because the food caused drooling, so the assistant caused drooling. Now, we often think that as humans, we're too clever to fall for this stuff. But actually, it's the exact opposite. Because we are very intelligent animals, we are very good at making associations between things. So we can be very susceptible to this, what we call classical conditioning, often on a very subconscious level. Now, how is this relevant to sleep? Well, if you look at a good sleeper, when good sleepers go to bed, we're usually feeling sleepy. In fact, that's usually why we go to bed, because we feel sleepy. And what good sleepers do in bed is that we sleep. Now, thousands of nights of going to bed, feeling sleepy and sleeping, for a good sleeper, the act of going to bed makes us feel sleepy and it makes us sleep. that classical conditioning, that Pavlovian reaction kicks in so that the bed makes us sleep. Now, for people with insomnia, they've also been to bed thousands of times in their lives. But for people with insomnia, the act of going to bed is often associated with a degree of anxiety, with frustration. It's a place where they do battle and very often lose the battle. And of course, people with insomnia spend a lot of time in the bed awake. Now, thousands of nights of going to bed feeling anxious and lying awake, for someone with insomnia, the act of going to bed makes them anxious and wakes them up. So the story that we hear almost universally in people with insomnia is this, is they'll say, I'm sitting in front of the TV and I'm feeling unbelievably sleepy and my head's dropping forward and I can't keep my eyes open. I think, I've got to go up to bed. So I stagger up into the bedroom, and as I get into bed, boom, I'm wide awake. My brain just switches on. And that's this process kicking in. It's the bed waking them up. We also have another problem, which is, of course, that for most of us, our beds and our bedrooms are our only real personal private space in the house. So the bedroom is the place we go to get away from the family, to make a private phone call, to study, to work. Some of these are nice things, some of these are not nice things, but these are all things we're doing awake. And so there is this another pathway reinforcing an association between the bed and the bedroom and wakefulness. And this is particularly problematic now during the lockdown, where we are largely confined to our homes, where a lot of us are trying to work from home, that actually we are spending a lot more time in the bedroom. So how do we tackle this? Well, there are two simple, but I'm not going to lie to you, not necessarily easy rules to address this, to harness the power of this conditioning, this association, to improve our sleep. The first rule is that anything which is a waking activity should be done in a waking space, and a waking space is anywhere but the bedroom. The lounge, the kitchen, the dining room, the garden, but not the bedroom. So what things are not allowed in the bedroom? Reading. That comes as a huge surprise to a lot of people because, most good sleepers read in bed. But important to say that if you are a good sleeper and if you have insomnia, the rules are different. It's a bit like being on a diet. When you have insomnia, if you're trying to improve your sleep, you have to do things differently. So it's absolutely fine to read before you go to bed, but read before you go to bed. So you read in the lounge, and when you start to feel sleepy, you put the book down in the lounge and go up to the bedroom. No audiobooks, radio, TV, music, white noise, whale noise machines, computer or iPad, texting, talking on the phone, meditation, prayer. No chilling out. If you need to chill out during the day, if you need to lie down and take the weight off because your back's aching, absolutely fine, but don't do it in the bedroom. You have to find somewhere else in the house to do that. No exercising, ironing, working, studying, eating, drinking. No conversations. Now, you're not taking a vow of silence when you go into the bedroom. Of course, you can chat with your partner and ask how their day was and so on. But if you're going to have a whole detailed conversation about should we remortgage the house or what are we going to do about junior's maths grades, you have to say to your partner, hang on a second, we've got to take this out the bedroom. No, painting, crosswords, knitting, brushing the cat, playing with the dog, helping the kids with their homework, all of that's got to happen outside the bedroom. What is allowed in the bedroom is sleep, intimacy, and getting dressed and undressed as long as you don't spend a lot of time doing it. If you're someone who spends an hour, trying on 6 different ties and all different cufflinks or, doing lots of makeup or whatever, then take that out the bedroom and do it in the bathroom. But if you take 10 or 15 minutes to get dressed or undressed, it's okay to do in the bedroom. This is a complete list. This list is incomplete. So if after this webinar you think, oh crikey, I should have asked Hugh if X is allowed in the bedroom, if it's not sleep, sex, or getting dressed and undressed, the answer is no. Simple as that. This does mean that you might have to change, where you do things. It might have an impact on your bed partner. If you've always watched the 10 o'clock news in bed together, you're going to have to say to them, well, you can watch it in bed, but I'm going to watch it in the lounge. And when you've turned the TV off in the bedroom, then I will come up to bed. The second rule is one which I'm not going to lie to you is quite tough, and it's what we call the 15-minute rule. And the 15-minute rule is this: is that if you go to bed and you think, look, I haven't, you're lying there and you feel like it's been about 15 minutes and you haven't fallen asleep, or if you wake up in the night and it takes you're lying there for more than 15 minutes and not able to get back to sleep, then you should get up, get out of bed, get out of the bedroom, go to your lounge, your kitchen, your dining room, and do something that is pleasant, relaxing, and enjoyable. Whatever that may be. Read a book, watch another episode of your favorite sitcom, listen to a podcast, do a puzzle, anything that you enjoy doing. And you do this until you feel sleepy, until your head starts dropping forward, your eyes start closing, and only when you feel sleepy do you go back to bed. If you fall asleep within 15 minutes, great. If not, you've got to repeat that process. Now, just a couple of things to say about this. When we say you should get up after about 15 minutes, we don't want you lying there kind of watching the clock. If you're lying there, you just think, look, it feels like it's been at least 15 minutes. I'm starting to get irritated now because I'm not falling asleep. That's your cue to get out of bed. Only go back to bed when you feel sleepy. Now, on some nights, that might happen after 2 minutes. On some nights, that might happen after 2 hours. And there might be some nights where it doesn't happen at all and you don't get back to bed and you have a rotten day the next day. But the thing to remember about this technique is that the point of doing this technique is not to help you get any more sleep on the night that you do it. The point of doing this technique is that if you are awake, you are not awake in the bedroom. You may spend a lot less time in the bed and the bedroom, but all of that time is spent asleep. And that will gradually change your association with the bed so that the bed stops waking you up and starts making you sleep. Now, you may have built up this adverse association with your bed over many years or even decades. And this is why it can take a few weeks before this technique really kicks in. But the payoff is that once it does kick in, it works incredibly well and it works in the long term. Moving on to this thing that we call the buffer zone. And again, this is something that's become more difficult for people in lockdown. There needs to be a separation in time between your day and your bed. During the day, we are busy the whole time. Even when we think we're not busy, we're usually listening to the radio, checking our Facebook page for updates. And the problem is that all sorts of things are happening for us during the day, things that make us angry, excited, anxious, decisions we have to make. And all of these thoughts and feelings don't really have an opportunity to get processed because we're so distracted all the time. And for most of us, the first time that we ever really do absolutely nothing with no distractions is when we get into bed and turn out the light. And so it's not surprising that all of these thoughts and feelings that have built up during the day are going to come flooding into your brain and start demanding your attention. So what we advise is that an hour or two before bed, and you don't have to be rigid about the time here, but approximately an hour or two before bed, you sit down for 5 minutes, and it only has to take 5 minutes. Write down the things that are currently annoying or worrying you, the things that are playing on your mind. Also, a good principle is to write down the things that are going well, that you're grateful for, that you're excited about, or looking forward to, something nice that happened today, because it's very easy for our brains to focus on the negative and forget that actually there are lots of positive things going on as well. Then you write down a to-do list for the next day. And the first part of that is just to write down the stuff I know I've got to do. So, okay, I've got to go online and do a shop to get a delivery for next weekend. I need to do that bank transfer, etc., etc. And then what you do is you go back to your bad stuff, the things you're worried about or angry about, or upset about. And for as many of these as possible, you write down just one single realistically achievable action you can take the next day. So for example, if you've written down, I'm really worried about money at the moment, there's no point writing down, tomorrow I'm going to sort out my finances, because you'll never do that in a day. what you might do is you'll say, tomorrow I'm going to look at my bank statement for April and see if I'm still paying subscriptions for things I no longer use. Something that I can realistically do in a few minutes and tick off at the end of the day. And do that for as many of the negative things as possible, and also for the positive things, because you might say, well, actually had a really fantastic chat with my friends in Australia on Zoom. I'm going to drop them an email and set up a time to chat with them next week. Now, the problem with to-do lists, of course, is they can become incredibly long. And so what you then do is you simply go down that to-do list and you divide those tasks into those that are essential, those that are desirable, and those that are optional. And the reason that this is so useful is that we all go to bed thinking, oh my gosh, I've got 21 things to do tomorrow. And if I don't sleep, that's going to be awful. If instead you say, look, I've got 21 things to do tomorrow, but only 3 of them are absolutely essential, that feels much more manageable and you feel much more in control. And as soon as you feel in control, it takes a lot of the pressure off the sleep. So this is just this 5-minute exercise that you do an hour or 2 before bed, and then you have what we call the buffer zone, which is your me time. This is your time to reward yourself for getting through the day. So you can watch TV, chat with your partner, play a game, listen to music, go for a walk, whatever you find relaxing and enjoyable for you. And then once you get into bed, it's a good idea to do some formal relaxation. And the thing that we use with our patients is something called progressive muscle relaxation. This was developed by a Jewish physician and actually was banned in Nazi Germany because it was developed by a Jewish physician. So there's a good reason to do it. But it's actually an incredibly effective technique, and it was first tested as a treatment for insomnia back in the 1930s. So it's been around a long time, and we know it really works. On my final slide, I am going to give you a web address to access a version of this muscle relaxation program that's freely available. It's my voice in it, so I will be invading your bedrooms. Someone said it's quite odd that my voice is the last thing lots of people hear before they go to sleep at night. But it's free for you to access, and you can listen to it and use it as you go to sleep. Finally, I don't know if anyone recognizes this gentleman. This is Viktor Frankl, who wrote that amazing book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was a physician from Austria and Holocaust survivor. And Frankl said something very interesting. He said, sleep is like a bird that will walk really close to your hand, but as soon as you reach out to grab it, it flies away. So stop grabbing for sleep is his message. And this is a really useful message, actually, because if you ask a good sleeper how they sleep, they say, I don't know, it just happens. I don't do anything to sleep. Sleep just happens to me. Whereas people with insomnia are always striving for sleep, always trying to sleep. They're grabbing for that bird. So Frankl's technique is that when you go to bed, instead of trying to sleep, try to keep your eyes open for as long as you can. So you're lying in bed, you turn the light out, it's dark, it's quiet. Remember, there's no TV, no radio. You're not reading or anything in the bedroom. You're just lying in the bed. But rather than lying with your eyes closed, lie there with your eyes open. And it's surprising how effective this can be. And I think one of the main reasons it does work is that you discover actually how hard it is to keep your eyes open, which lets you know that you're feeling sleepy. If you are struggling to keep your eyes open, that's because sleep is sneaking up on you. And that's a really comforting feeling to have. So in conclusion, get up at the same time every day, get outdoors as soon as you wake up if you can, exercise regularly, don't nap during the day, and go to bed later. Go to bed, even if you don't want to keep a diary to work out how long you're sleeping and do all of that arithmetic, at least don't go to bed until you are battling to keep your eyes open. Stay out of the bedroom if you're not asleep. Use the bed in the bedroom for sleep only. Have that 5 minutes of worry time, then plan for the next day, and then have some me time to reward yourself for getting through the day. Go to bed, do some relaxation, And if you're still awake at the end of the relaxation program, then try and keep your eyes open and see how you feel. And for that progressive muscle relaxation, if you go to SoundCloud and just do a search for RLHIM, that stands for the Royal London Hospital for Integrated Medicine, where I work, it will bring up the 2 tracks for the progressive muscle relaxation. There is no copyright on them, so you are welcome to download them, send them to your friends, make copies, and so on. And I'll leave that up there for 2 secs before I stop sharing the screen, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Hugh, that's great. Thank you so much for a really outstanding talk. Thank you. So I've been receiving questions from people through the talk. Many of them, of course, you've answered as you've gone. Some really been incredibly clear. So thank you so much. So I'm going to try to guide us through some of the questions that we've had. But before we do, I just wanted to come back to one of the main ideas that you spoke about, which is this idea of sleep fuel, sleep in a fuel tank, which feels counterintuitive. It's certainly not the normal language that we use when we think about sleep. Yeah. Normally, when we think about sleep, we think about tiring ourselves out, depleting ourselves, using up all of our energy. And you're talking about kind of filling ourselves. So is that just a good metaphor, or is there a real kind of science there that we're talking about?
So there is a real science there. This is very much a real thing. And it's one of the few times I think that the ancient Greek physicians got it right, because they talked about the buildup of some sort of soporific substance during the day. And we actually think we know what the substance is. So most cells in our body store energy in a molecule which is called adenosine triphosphate. And it's basically a molecule of something called adenosine, and it's got 3 little attachments. And when you knock those attachments off, it releases energy. And as your brain uses energy during the day, you break this molecule down, and the adenosine starts floating around in the brain. Now, adenosine is a sedating neurotransmitter. Its action is blocked by caffeine. That's why caffeine wakes you up, because it blocks the sedating neurotransmitter. And so this adenosine builds up progressively during the day. And then at night, your brain takes the adenosine back up into the cells, reattaches those little attachments so that it's charged up with energy for the next day. So this is a real, not just a real physiological thing, but actually we know what the chemical is that underlies it.
So why do some people, or why do we at different stages in our lives need more sleep fuel? Why is it that, a teenager might need a lot more sleep than someone who's a bit older?
So, I mean, it's one of the great mysteries of sleep, because we don't fully understand the functions of sleep. It is difficult to know, but certainly our need for sleep reduces as we get older. And that's really obvious in kids, where, a newborn baby sleeps maybe 18, 19 hours a day, even though it doesn't feel that way to the parents. And by the time they're teenagers, it's more like 10 hours. And by the time we're adults, 7 to 8 hours. And that continues through adult life as well. So you need, on average, about an hour and a half less sleep in your 70s than you did in your 20s. Certainly in younger children, sleep is really important for maturation of the brain, for the development of the brain. Once we get to adulthood, it may have some different functions. And certainly one of the prime functions of sleep that we are confident about is that it's important for memory formation and for learning new things. And it may simply be, as we get older, because we already know a lot more, there's less learning to be done, and therefore we need less sleep. I will say, and I'm sure this is something that people often, may well have asked, people often ask, how do you know? I mean, how much sleep should we be getting? And the very simple answer is, whatever sleep allows you to feel alert and rested most of the day, most days, is the right amount of sleep for you. And I stress most of the day, most days, because nobody feels alert and rested all day, every day. everybody feels a bit drowsy after lunch and a bit knackered after work, and we all have the odd bad day or the odd bad week. But if you are feeling alert and rested and well most of the day, most days, whatever sleep you're getting is the right amount for you, whether that is 3 hours or 13 hours.
So I think that's really important, because I think one of the anxieties that people often feel is that there is a set amount of sleep that we somehow need to have.
Yeah.
And, you're looking at the clock and you're watching it go, and therefore you kind of are not getting your 8 hours, which is sort of the kind of the language that's often
Yeah.
used. So there really isn't a kind of an 8 hours. There isn't a sense that there is the right amount of sleep.
No, this myth of 8 hours, I mean, it comes to us as, as if it was one of the 10 commandments. And yet, actually, where this comes from is that on average, adults need in the region of 7 to 8 hours sleep. But that's an average. So in the same way that your average shoe size might be a size 5, that doesn't mean you're abnormal if you take a size 7 or a size 3. And the same is true with sleep. Sleep is the servant of the day. So one shouldn't strive for X number of hours during the night. One should strive for whatever allows me to feel okay during the day.
So your focus is not on hours of sleep, but on the time you get up and the time you go to bed, and getting into the rhythms of that. That's much more the focus than any concept of amount of time.
Yeah. So if someone feels they're not sleeping well, the reason it usually bothers people is, yes, all of these scare stories in the Daily Mail about how it's going to kill you. Interestingly, insomnia, actually, there's really good evidence that people with insomnia do not die any younger than people without insomnia. This is one of the great myths that, if I don't sleep or if I don't get my 8 hours, I'm going to die young. And that's not the case at all. And so our target is to have you getting however much sleep you need to function well in the day. And although when we're working with patients, we do get them to keep a sleep diary, so they are somewhat obsessively recording their sleep time. That's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. We're not aiming to get them to X number of hours. We're aiming to get them into the rhythm that's right for them.
And to stick to that rhythm, I suppose, because one of the things you said, which is perhaps most challenging, especially for those of us who sleep well, is the idea of always getting up at the same time every day.
Yeah.
But also when we think about things like holidays, and of course currently we're in this sort of strange kind of liminal place between real life and work and vacation, and that's part of the challenge. We assume that kind of on holidays we go to bed later and we get up later. But your advice is not to do that, to get into that fixed rhythm all the time.
No, look, I mean, we are flexible about it in that way. If, for example, you're going away for 2 weeks and you want to go to bed an hour later and get up an hour later or 2 hours later, that's absolutely fine, as long as you're then consistent for those 2 weeks. What we don't want is someone getting up at 7 o'clock today, 9 o'clock tomorrow, 8:30 the day after, and there's this kind of this day-to-day variation. For example, a lot of patients will say, you know what, I am really happy to get out of bed at 6 o'clock in the summer, but I only want to get up at 8 o'clock in the winter. And that's absolutely fine. As long as once you've moved to that new time, you then, don't chop and change, you stick with it for a decent period of time. And again, if you are a good sleeper, remember that these rules don't necessarily apply to you. If you're a good sleeper, you can get away with murder. And if you can have a lie-in on the weekend and that works for you, that's absolutely fine. And I think, for those listening who are good sleepers, the reality is that most of us who are good sleepers don't get as much sleep as we should. And people with insomnia will probably want to kill you if they say, you know what, you could sleep an hour longer and you don't. You know what I would give for that hour of sleep? So this is a good opportunity if you are a good sleeper but feel that do feel tired in the day. This is a good opportunity to use the time when you would otherwise be commuting to kind of pay off some of that sleep debt and to sleep a little bit longer.
So in that sense of rhythm, one of the other things you spoke about was not napping, and kind of that sense of kind of us using up the sleep fuel prematurely. Napping is something that kind of some of us choose to do, but for many people, it's something that happens to them inadvertently.
Yeah.
So do you have advice for those to whom it happens inadvertently?
Yeah. Okay. So number one, if it's any time up until 2 in the afternoon, use caffeine. If you know that you have a good chance, there's a high likelihood of falling asleep because you're about to sit down and watch a movie, have a cup of coffee. The trick with caffeine is to remember that it takes at least 20 minutes to start working. So if you are going into a meeting, or you know that you're about to do something where you've got a high likelihood of nodding off, get that coffee in 30 to 60 minutes before you hit that danger period. Get your family to wake you. If what they probably do now, if you're not a good sleeper, is if they see you nodding off, they go, shh, just let them get some sleep. They really need it. From now on, they've got to go, oi, wake up, talk to me. Bright light, fresh air, and physical exertion will get you through almost any sleepy period. So just going for a walk around the block. If you're watching a TV, have a policy that every ad break, you stand up, stretch, walk once around the room. If you're watching a movie on BBC where there are no ad breaks, then pick a keyword. So every time you hear James Bond, stand up, stretch, walk once around the room. And one final bit of advice, and this is going to sound really weird, but actually there's really good evidence for this, is to chew gum. It's incredibly difficult to fall asleep chewing gum. And it's why, for example, in the army, when people do sentry duty at night, it's one of their strategies to ensure they don't fall asleep, is always have a few sticks of gum in their pocket. So that's always a very simple and portable, but a very effective strategy, even in patients with narcolepsy. So it really works.
So if you can't take caffeine, take Wrigley's.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So while we're talking about things we can take or things we imbibe that affect our sleep, do you want to just say a little bit about alcohol and sleep? Why is it that alcohol that makes us sleepy then stops us sleeping?
So alcohol is a sedating substance, and it's true that alcohol does make you fall asleep faster. But there are two problems with alcohol. The first is that it significantly adversely affects the quality of sleep, and in particular, disrupts deep sleep. So you're not going to get as good a quality of sleep with alcohol. The other problem with alcohol is that it's quite short acting. And when it comes out your bloodstream halfway through the night, you get a kind of a rebound alertness, and that then wakes you up. And what's been shown is that even quite moderate early evening drinking, like your pint after work, although it makes you fall asleep faster, it wakes you up so much earlier that on average you will sleep less after a drink rather than more. Now, I have to say, this is one of those things where we would say to people, I've had patients who, have said, look, I'm not a big drinker. I have a glass of wine with my dinner every night. That's it. And we say, just experiment with it. Try for 2 weeks not having that glass of wine. And if it doesn't make a difference to your sleep, fine, then you can go back to having it. But if it does make a difference, then it's an easy fix. And I've actually been surprised at how many people have experienced quite significant improvements just by cutting out that very small amount of alcohol. And particularly for those people who have more difficulty staying asleep, where it's not so much that I'm having difficulty falling asleep, but I wake up a lot during the night, or I wake up too early in the morning. We often find that those people do really well if they cut back on the alcohol. So drink at lunch.
And if you are, and while we're talking about things that stop us sleeping or that we imbibe, I mean, there are lots of members of the shul and lots of people who are watching who are on medications of various sorts. Are there, a couple of people have emailed about being on steroids regularly and the impact that that's having on their sleep. Are there specific things that you can do if you are on medication that's affecting your sleep patterns?
So, look, it is difficult, and sometimes medications do have an impact on sleep. But by and large, if you follow the principles that we've talked about in this talk, they will outgun the medication. And this is important to say is for any medication where people say, this affects my sleep, there are as many people who say, no, it doesn't. And what that really tells us is that it's not inevitable if you're on a particular medication that you will sleep badly, but it may be an additional challenge, and you therefore just have to work a bit harder with these techniques that we've talked about. it's always worth having a chat with your doctor about whether it's best to take certain medications in the morning or the evening. So some medications, like for example, certain antidepressants, can be quite alerting and are better to take in the morning, whereas others can be sedating. And actually, if you struggle with your sleep, it's a good idea to take them at night because you can use them to help with your sleep. So the timing of the medication can be useful as well.
So let's come on to some of those techniques that you've spoken about, different ways of helping us to get to sleep. And you've spoken about the bedroom not being a place for various activities. And some of those activities, lots of us use to get to sleep. And in particular, I was really struck by not listening to the radio, not having podcasts or audiobooks and those sorts of things. And, those things that so many of us use as distractions to stop us from kind of entering into that anxiety zone, and also to take our mind off things, the brain distraction. It would feel slightly kind of counterintuitive to many people that you're saying not to do those things.
And this we understand that this is very counterintuitive, but there are a number of reasons why we say you shouldn't do it. First of all, very simply, it's a waking activity. And you want to do absolutely nothing but sleep and intimacy in the bed. The second reason is that sleep is very much about confidence. If you are confident that you will sleep, you will generally sleep. And if you are reliant on external props, external things such as, Radio 4 or music or a white noise machine or whatever, you're never going to develop the confidence that actually you are capable of sleeping. And finally, if you're going and staying at a friend's house or you go stay in a hotel where you don't have access to these things, you're in trouble. So we want everything that you need to sleep to be completely in here, portable, and completely internal. As I say, people do feel they need a distraction at night because your head does fill up with stuff. And there are two reasons why your head fills up with stuff. One is, as we said, you don't have a chance to process it during the day. So having that 5-minute worry and plan time an hour or two before bed gets that stuff out your head at that point. And the second thing is that if the bed is a place you've always worried or, had lots of thoughts running around your head, the act of going to bed makes you worry and makes you have lots of thoughts going around your head, which is exactly why you shouldn't do anything in the bed other than sleep. And even, when people say, well, no, we're not allowed to eat or drink in bed, can I not have breakfast in bed because that happens after my sleep? And the answer is no, because again, it's a waking activity. So although it does seem draconian, and it is hard for the first while that you do it, after about 5 weeks, this seems to be the average time it takes to start working, you get such a dramatic improvement in sleep. And of course, once you are a good sleeper, once you've recovered and you're sleeping well, then you can start reading in bed or listening to the radio in bed, because remember that if you're a good sleeper, these rules don't apply.
So we're getting close to the end of our time. So I'm going to apologize to those who've asked about jet lag and sleep apnea and shift work, all of those people who have kind of those specific questions. I apologize. But a few people have asked about getting up at night and kind of changing changing the rhythm of their sleep so that they are sleeping almost in tranches with gaps in the middle. And you spoke about the kind of 15-minute rule and sort of getting up and doing something else and then coming back. I mean, is that a sustainable pattern? Is it okay to be essentially getting your night of sleep in 2 bits or 3 bits?
Yeah. So again, it really comes down to whether you feel well in the day. And if you feel well in the day, then whatever's going on at night is absolutely fine. And interestingly, there's been some work done by a historian from the States who, I think he was looking at Scottish court records, and he kept coming across a reference to something called first sleep, which implied that there was a last sleep. And the more he looked into this, the more he realized that certainly, at least in Northern Europe and North America, up until the invention of gas lighting, this is the way people slept, is that when the sun went down, there was nothing to do. So people went to bed earlier, slept for a couple of hours, woke up at around midnight, potted around for a couple of hours. This is when Catholic monks would go to midnight mass. People might go visit the neighbors, spend a bit of time with the family, and then they'd have a second sleep. And that actually, this biphasic sleep was the norm in Northern Europe up until the end of the invention of gas lighting. And actually, it was thought this might be the way we were all supposed to sleep, but a more recent pair of studies looking at hunter-gatherers in more tropical environments have shown that they tend to have a single sleep at night. So they tend to sit up later and have a single sleep. And I think what it tells us is that basically there's no one right way to sleep. That sleep is very adaptable. In the Mediterranean countries, they have a siesta in the day, a short sleep at night. In Northern Europe, we tend to have one big sleep at night, but used to have two sleeps at night. In the tropics, it's different again. So there is no one exact right way to sleep. Judge your sleep by how you feel in the day.
It's a really wonderful place to end. We promised everyone that we would always be done in time to applaud for our key workers. But before we do that, we're going to applaud to you, Hugh. That was really the most wonderful hour. Thank you so much. We're really very, very grateful for you sharing your wisdom. I'm really delighted that so many people are enjoying these lectures. Next week, Jonathan Hall, QC, who's a member of Alyth, who's the UK's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, is going to be speaking about risk and terrorism risk. He's just completed a report on the